step number one is to create some pause. And so again, this, whether I do this every time or not, this is what I've learned, and this is the approach that I'll practice maybe forever. Who knows? I tend to not think people perfect these things because we're in human bodies and we have limitations. But the practice itself is to first create pause. Because if you have pause, then you give time to actually access the conscious mind to be able to think about it and discern what is the appropriate response here. And no one's ever complained that they didn't respond too quickly when they were challenged. It's the more time, the better. The more time we have to consider how we actually want to respond to the situation, the better. So step number one is create some space. And then step number two is always act in the betterment of, or let's just say this, always act generously.
Welcome to Unleash Thyself, a podcast where we journey into the depths of personal transformation, spirituality, and growth. I'm your host, Konstantin Morun, and today we welcome Madhu Dasa. Madhu, formerly a monk, is now a holistic health and business lifestyle coach. He lived and trained for half a decade as a monk in the Bhakti yoga tradition. During these years, he traveled extensively studying Vedic arts and sciences under renowned teachers. In his free time, he's a professional musician who tours internationally. Now, Madhu and I have had a beautiful conversation in today's episode that I can't wait for you to partake in. We'll hear more about his story, some of his teachings, and you'll understand why a holistic approach to health is so valuable for all of us. So I can't wait for you to have a chance to listen to this, provide your feedback, and please, before we start, take a moment to click that like button, subscribe, and leave us a comment or a review if you feel so inclined. And with that being said, let's begin our beautiful conversation. Welcome, beautiful souls. I have with me Madhu. Madhu, welcome. It's such a pleasure to see with you and have a beautiful conversation.
Oh, so grateful to be here and actually get to talk about relevant topics that are, well, my opinion, transformational, actually life-changing.
Yes. So let's start right there. Your mission is very similar to mine: to inspire, to empower, to help, to guide people on their life journeys. And you talk about the 4 pillars of life, very similar to what we talk here on the podcast, which is your physical, your mental, your emotional, your spiritual pillars. When was it that you realized that you wanted to look at life holistically and not just as, hey, right now I'm going to focus on just my physical well-being, or I'm just going to focus on my spirituality? Because I know you grew up in an environment where spirituality was top of mind.
Definitely grew up in an environment, my parents were very quote unquote spiritual, but like any proper child, I wasn't into it. I was like, this is weird. Spirituality might work for my hippie-esque parents, but not for me. I'm a thinker, whatever I tried to pride myself on. But what happened was, it really comes down to the question of what's the alternative? What is the alternative to creating a sustainable, natural, organic, holistic lifestyle? The alternative is quite ugly and bleak, frankly. It's, if you live an artificial life, you get an artificial product. If you live detached from nature, you live detached from nature. you suffer all the consequences of that. So just inevitably, by living life and seeing what happens when I work with the currents of life, work with the currents of my mind and my body in a progressively healthy direction. And when I've seen when I didn't make such what I would consider to be healthy decisions, it was very easy to see the difference of what life looks like and what your body actually feels like and what your mind is like to sit in.
So what was it that you realized that, what your parents were doing and were going through was not really that crazy, and perhaps it was something for you to look into?
I was never a reader. I have a reading disability, so reading for me was always very difficult. So I'd never read a book cover to cover in my life. I hadn't done it into my teens. I would just fail essays and stuff like that in school because I just wouldn't read it. And so my father, being very clever, still clever, he said, I'll give you $100 if you read this book called the Bhagavad Gita, which is an ancient book it was written around 5,000 years ago or so on the tenets of yoga philosophy. Not so much the physical stretching like we have in the West here, but yoga in the literal sense of connecting to divinity and our higher natures in a sustainable way. And I read this book because I needed the money. And I was like, all right, fine, I'll read this weird spiritual book thing. And it completely opened up my mind. I had never conceived of ideas that were presented in that book. An example being like, okay, I'm a soul. And what does that even mean? Everyone says, oh, you have a soul, you have a spirit. It's like, what is this general terminology? And really understanding the nature of the soul and say the eternal nature of the soul and understanding like, what is karma? Actually, what is karma in terms of every action having a reaction, and how to live in this world where you can free yourself from the negative reactions of life. What is divinity? Is like, what is the conception of that which is higher than me and the power is higher than whatever tiny little power I have in this world? What's my relationship with this world, relationship with all other living entities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These answers, I mean, what to speak of the answers? The topics it brought up in my mind was enough. What to speak of then
Mhm.
giving answers that just make sense. I'm a big fan of logic, and I want things to actually make sense. I don't want to
Yes,
just have faith. I'm a big fan of faith as well, but not just faith. It has to have faith. It has to make sense and have faith. And that's where I found the biggest transformations have manifested in my life.
that's amazing. I love that, Madhu. And I can resonate with that a lot. I mean, it took me a long time to actually open up to some of the things you just mentioned. And in the last couple of years, I've been on this journey myself. And it's beautiful because for me, for example, I have a math background. So, like you, I like to see, let's call it proof, but not necessarily proof, but see the logic in it, right? And see how the science is catching up to some of these spiritual concepts that we know deep inside of us to be true, but it's very hard to prove. So you read a book. Now your mind is expanding. You have all these questions. Is this a time when you essentially said, you know what, I need to find these answers, and you became a monk?
Yeah, that's the whole story pretty much. But maybe I'll expand on it briefly. And even before I do, I always say I appreciate those with math backgrounds because you find that some of the greatest philosophers over the last, I mean, frankly, 1,000 years, they all got really deep into math because math and logic go so hand in hand because
Yes.
there's a certainty. Trying to understand and connect the dots and provide a sense of reasoning to really get to an ultimate answer. That's math, that's logic. So anyway, I very much appreciate
Appreciate
that
it. Yeah.
about you. So yeah, I read the book when I was 16, Bhagavad Gita, and then what happened is I realized how much I didn't know. You don't
Yes.
know how much you don't know. And I was faced with the reality that I could either keep going the direction I was, which wasn't, I was just like a dumb kid.
Yeah.
Um, and just go in the direction of the other dumb kids, whatever the case might be. Or I could actually try to move in a direction of purpose and trying to understand who I am and why am I here in the first place and what am I actually here to do. And through the
Mm.
study of the ancient Vedic literatures, ancient texts that come from it's when you say India, it's not a fair assessment because these literatures come from a much greater scope than just what modern day India is, but it's all the reverberating countries as well, which was once known as Bharata, which is anyway a big section of the
Mm.
world. The literatures that come from that area of the world, I started to be faced with the reality that we are all unique, and that means we all have a unique gift. One person is not like anyone, even if you have an identical twin, you're
Yes.
different. And so, how do we then take these unique gifts and contribute in such a way as to not just improve our quality of life, but improve the quality of lives of other individuals? And so, what made most sense for me at that point was shave my head, throw on some robes, and move into a monastery and live in an ashram as a monk. And I did that for about 5 years because I wanted to get the heck away from all the suffering. There's this idea that things
Mm.
cause suffering, and it's actually not the things; it's our attachment to things. But as a child, I thought, oh, these things are the problem, so let's get away from all of them. Only to learn as a monk, the thing was never the problem. You're the problem. Me, Madhu's the problem.
Oh,
My
that's powerful.
attachment to things. But anyway, and
Right.
that's how it all transpired.
So let me say, let's go to the attachment to things. How has your attachment to things or your perspective on that shifted over the 5 years you spent in the ashram?
Well, I think it's important to preface that just like if you were to take a knife, one can't say a knife is good or bad. It's a knife. And that knife could be used to perform surgery by a surgeon to remove something and save someone's life. That same knife can be used to stab someone and kill them. The knife was never good or bad, it just is. And similarly, things just are. Like material objects are just material objects. They're not necessarily good or bad. It's the intention of the sentient entity behind that matter. Just like with a knife, what the person does with that knife is what makes the actions, quote unquote, good or bad, moral, ethical,
Mm.
immoral. Well, I mean, whatever qualification we're looking at of evaluation, be it good or bad or something else. It's the intention behind the individual behind it. So when it comes to attachment to things, there is no version of reality where we can be completely detached from things because we're in a body. We're attached to a body. And when you say, wait, what do you mean attached to a body? We know we're not our body because the body changes at every moment. Every 7 years, every single cell in our body is completely changed and regenerated. That means we've taken on new carne. We've reincarnated. So if you're over 21 years old, congratulations. You've at least reincarnated 3 times, over 28, 4, etc. So the body's constantly changing. And we're not, however. Okay, we might be evolving consciously, but we're witnessing the body change. That means we're something different than the body. Just like if my arm gets chopped off, am I less of a person? No, I'm still always a person because I'm not the body. The body is something the real me, the observer of the body, could witness. Same thing as I'm not my mind. I have a mind, but I can watch my mind do what it does and I can actually control it. Who's that actual me, that I behind the mind, behind that body? And this is what the ancient yoga literatures, Vedic literatures call the soul or the self, the unit of consciousness. First, understanding that this unit of consciousness, the self that I am, I'm attached without any option to a body and a mind. There's, I mean, there's only one thing that happens if you detach yourself from your mind and your body, and that's called death. And no one's interested in unnecessarily welcoming that. So we're faced with attachments. The real question is, how do I work with these attachments in a way that they're going to free me instead of bind me? The mistake people make, and people will see a cool meme or read a sentence, a quote out of a book or something like that, like, oh, remove all your attachments and you'll be happier, whatever the case might be, something kitschy. And it's quite confusing. Because if we try to detach ourselves from everything, we're going to find life becomes much more difficult because it's just not how the mind works. We're dependent. Try not to get attached to water. Good luck. See how long that lasts. Like there
Yeah.
are things that are actually important to be attached to. And so the question is, how do we use these attachments, these things that we're faced with in this world, but use it to improve my and others' quality of life, as opposed to letting it bind and entangle us? And so that's really where the question comes of, how do I manage these attachments in such a way that they become more uplifting than degrading? And there's different philosophical perspectives of how to do that we get into as well. But that's the general overarching principle of understanding attachment from a proper perspective as a human, or as a, let's say, a soul in a human body with a human mind, etc.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I would love to delve deeper. It's actually a topic that we haven't discussed enough on the show yet around attachment. And I love your perspective because that's something I've come to realize as well. Things just are, our perspective of them is literally what shapes our reality. If I see something as good or bad or anything in between, I mean, most people, I would say every person actually, has their own definition of what good and bad is. And that alone starts to change your attachment to certain things. So let's delve a bit deeper. How do you see your attachment now to things? Because you said you're using it to your advantage, meaning to further your mission as you understand it now. And how can someone that feels very attached to something without necessarily seeing the purpose behind it or how to further their purpose, how can they get to a stage where you are at, or at least be on the path to becoming a bit more enlightened and using it for their own good, whatever that good is?
Yeah, there's a term I really appreciate that's mentioned. There's what's called yukta vairagya and palgu vairagya. Literally, these terms mean, yukta vairagya means we renounce. Vairagya is a Sanskrit term that means vairagya, to give up, to renounce something, to be detached from something. And yukta is actually the same word that same root that yoga come from, yuk, which actually yoke in English is also a cognate from Sanskrit because it comes from English is a Germanic and Latin language, and Latin comes from Sanskrit. Anyway, we're not going to do a whole.
Hey, it's Konstantin here, and I want to take a brief moment to truly thank you for being a part of this incredible journey of transformation. You are the reason we are creating this content. I see you and I appreciate you. Your support truly means the world to me. I want to ask you for a small favor. I'd love for you to join our mission by hitting like, subscribe, or leaving a thoughtful comment or review. Your engagement helps others discover these insights, and together we can continue to unlock the power of authenticity and personal transformation. Thank you for being a part of this movement. Now, back to the episode.
Whole
History
linguistic
lesson.
thing.
That's
But
beautiful. I love that.
we have this word yukta, which is where it's saying the English word yoke, same meaning, which means to connect or to unite. And so yukta vairagya is a principle where we engage everything in service. We anything that can be there, we engage it in service, which means uplifting, again, not just ourselves, but primarily uplifting others. Whereas palgu vairagya means false renunciation. It means giving up something that could otherwise be used to benefit the lives of others. And so an example might be, one of my teachers used to say this. He used to say, uh, he's from India. He's from Bengal in India, West Bengal, and he uh, was a monk for many, 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 many decades. So shaven head, robes, etc. And he said you could go around India sometimes and you see some beggars on the street, and some of them, they pride themselves on they won't even touch money because money's dirty. Money's the root of all evil, whatever the case might be. And you talk to 5 people, you're going to get some feelings about, oh, money's a problem, money's an issue, this, that, the other. Similarly to a knife, money's not good or bad. It just is. And money amplifies. So if you got a good mind, quote unquote good, if we want to get into axiology and
Yeah.
assessing values, but the idea is like, if you have whatever's on your mind, the money's going to make that accessible. So if you got good ideas, those good ideas are going to be put into society. If you got bad ideas will be put into society. And so he would say, these so-called renunciates, sometimes people give them money and they say, no, no, no. And they would go like this, like, I don't touch money. And he said, but when people want to give me money, I go like this, because I can actually take that money and use it to benefit dozens, if not thousands, if not millions of people's lives. And so really the approach with attachment is, how can I look at my life in a very objective way? And to be objective, we usually need others that are further on the path to say, hey, you know what? The thing you're trying to justify as an attachment, I don't know. I don't know if that's serving you really well, no matter how much you might try to justify that it is. But if we're honest with ourselves, we'll see in our life what's actually benefiting us and what isn't. And the litmus test is our freedom, is how much freedom do we have? And an example being, if somebody were to say, I'm taking away X right now, how would you react? Would you get emotional about it? That's a pretty good indication that there's some attachment there. Would you throw a fit? Would you you'll know how you feel about the thing if somebody says, hey, I'm taking this away right now. No, you can't. Not right now, please. And okay, that's an indication that we're potentially too attached. We're over attached to something. Rather, we want to become, and which means practice, being equiposed to things that are transient in this world, things that are temporary, things that aren't inevitable for our welfare and for the welfare of others. And that doesn't mean, again, palguragya, false renunciation, doesn't mean you look at your family and you're like, oh, this is all an illusion, to hell with it. It's like, obviously we're being humans here. We're being logical. We don't just get rid of anything, because humans and other living entities are the best, most important thing in our life. And if you don't believe me, if I said, here's $1 billion, you get whatever you want, live in a house bigger than you could have ever imagined, but you can never see anyone ever again and have a relationship. No one's going to take that. Why? Because relationships are the most important thing. And so attachments to people who uplift us, that's typically a healthy attachment. So anywho, if we look at our attachments and we consider them from an objective standpoint, which helps to have somebody, a third party to look in, then we can see, how do I use this in a way that betters myself and others, and not unnecessarily reject, say no to something that could otherwise be used to help.
Yeah, powerful. I love that, Madhu. Lots of questions come up. But let me ask you this. When it comes to, let's say, money, right? Like, it's not good, not bad. I went through a stage myself where I was like, no, I have as much as I need. I don't want to chase more. I just want to do this out of the goodness of my heart. And while the motives perhaps were good, and was about giving back, I realized what you just said is that the actual more resources you can come into, the more help you can give. So you can actually take your mission and 10x it, 100x it, 1000x it, because you now have access to something that can be used for good, and like you said, or bad, depending on what's in your mind. And my entire relationship with money and other things has changed in that moment when I came to the realization. And I feel like some people have to go through the stages sometimes to realize, wait a second, what we're attaching ourselves to or what we're trying to reject, it's not just black and white. There's so many colors that we have to see first, and then we get to the bottom of it. When today, for example, right, when you're looking at your life and I say, okay, someone is going to take something from you, how do you react? Do you still see attachment to that thing? Or it could be a person, could be an animal, could be some part of nature. How do you see that?
Well, there's how Madhu responds, and Madhu's a work in progress, as I like to say.
Yeah.
Madhu doesn't always speak in third person, but when he does, there's how I react to it, and then there's how I'd like to react to it. And so certainly there's times where I'm able to respond properly, which is um, it's emotional, because if we become non-emotional, then we become non-human, and it's very unhealthy to you could see there's different we won't get so deep in this, but there's three different types of traumatic responses typically for immature behavior. And one is to become explosive and reactive, but another is to become callous and to become hard-hearted and pretend like whatever, I don't even care about that anyway.
Hmm.
But attraction and aversion are two sides of the same coin. If there's a strong attraction or a strong aversion, there's an indication of an attachment there. And so there's this misunderstanding that you have to become unemotional, but that's just not legitimate, nor is it non-human. But rather, we welcome in a sense of logic and emotion simultaneously. And so what that looks like is always creating as much space as possible between the time that you respond. And notice I don't say the word react, because that's
Yes.
where you start to get in trouble, when you just react without thinking before before the words come out of the mouth. But always step number one is to create some pause. And so again, this, whether I do this every time or not, this is the what I've learned, and this is the approach that I'll practice maybe forever. Who knows? I don't. I tend to not think people perfect these things, because we're in human bodies and we have limitations. But the practice itself is to first create pause, because if you have pause, then you give time to actually access the conscious mind, to be able to think about it and discern what is the appropriate response here. And no one's ever complained that they didn't respond too quickly when they were challenged. It's the more time, the better. The more time we have to consider how we actually want to respond to the situation, the better. So step number one is create some space. And then step number two is always act in the betterment of, or let's just say this, always act generously. If we lean into generosity, we're never going to feel like a loser. We're never going to feel like we've lost or that we've failed in any way, because there is no loser when we act from a charitable, generous sense. And so what that might mean in a conversation is, how can I respond in such a way that will be generous and giving to this person? And that looks very different depending on the circumstance. Generous could be being generous towards their motives, giving people the benefit of the doubt that they have healthy intentions behind, and then there's some misunderstanding, and being generous that way. Another way of being generous is, even if they don't have good motives, can I still be strong when I respond to this? Can I stay within my integrity of my values and not react from an explosive, reactive way? Well, that was redundant. React from an explosive, eruptive way
Mm.
that would actually cause more harm and more issue to this person. But rather, how can I, number one, pause, and then number two, be generous, which means extend ourselves for people. Now, obviously, if we're working on it and something's too sensitive, then just create pause and create more pause, and then create space, and then go core yourself, go work on, go align. Don't ever act from a place of when you're quote unquote triggered or stressed. Just like never go shopping when you're hungry. There's times to do things, there's times not to do things. Don't go shopping when you're hungry. It's not the time. Just like don't respond when you're angry or emotional. Always take pause. And once you're able to be centered, then act generous and speak and communicate in a way of generosity, because the worst case that can happen is the person doesn't change and still acts a fool, and it's a problem. And then you're still fine, because you're always fine. and you didn't need to let it unnecessarily get to you. So, anywho, that's step one, is to create pause, and step number two is be generous. And then from there, it's a much more nuanced, finessed approach of how to actually communicate and respond. But I find that those two principles have saved me from probably worlds of suffering.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine. It's amazing stuff, Madhu. And I can attest to that. I used to be someone that reacted in certain situations, and yeah, pausing and doing inner work is what brought the other side of me out, which was always there, but the reaction was taking it away, robbing me of the chance to actually show who I truly was in certain situations, be it on the soccer field or sometimes at home or other situations. Now, the generosity piece, that's actually such a powerful way to look at it, right? Because it's one way of saying, come from a compassionate place, come from empathy, come from love. But when we frame it as generosity and we look at our life, every time we give out of the goodness of our heart, be it money, time, resources, inspiration, empowerment, doesn't really matter. You always feel good at the end of it, no matter how the other person receives it. Now, of course, there are some instances, and I remember in my younger years when I would give and it wasn't received very well, so then I would get very upset about it. But most of the time, when you give, you feel like $1 million. So, to your point, what happens beyond that, at least you are in a good place for the most part.
Yeah, and one meditation for me often that I come back to is really giving, because there's this idea of being generous and giving. But to relate with what you just shared, there's times in which I feel like I'm giving, but then I get upset if it's not received properly, and then I always have to remind myself that giving means no expectation. Like being actually generous means actually generous, not a trade, not a reciprocation, not a mutual agreement, but it's
Yeah.
actually like being generous means actually extending myself, as opposed to, if I'm expecting some exchange or some return, then Madhu's not actually giving. There's
Yeah.
Madhu might try to convince himself he is, but yeah, and so the meditation is like how to actually be generous, how to actually give from a place of not expecting. And it's helpful to know that we have everything we need and more, and we're being taken care of by a very benevolent force that's taking care of the squirrels and the birds and everyone, what to speak of little old me.
Yeah. I love that. And speaking of meditation, I was doing some meditation. This was about a couple of weeks ago, and this came up for me. And this vision and analogy came up to me where I was, prior to the meditation, I enjoyed some fruits. And then it got me thinking. And what came to me was that if you look at the fruit tree, if you look at a bush that gives blueberries, for example, it's giving those fruits out of love because it's growing and it's giving its fruits of its labor. Sure, you can say from a biology point of view, it wants to make sure that the seeds make their way, but at the end of the day, it doesn't care who.
But even that's giving.
Right? Exactly. I love that. But it doesn't care who eats the blueberry or if it rots. Sure, it does. It's still going to grow the next year, right?
Yep.
Barring any calamity. But then you also have examples in nature where a plant will grow poisonous berries, right? So then to me, the analogy that came up to mind is like giving from a place of love versus giving from a place of fear. So being generous from a place of love, abundance, and being generous from a, if you can even use that word, from a place of fear. So I do something for you because I'm fearful that if I don't, I might lose my job or my status with you, or I won't get something in return. And ever since that kind of came to me, I was like, wow, I can look at my life and see, okay, when I'm having a conversation with you and I'm giving, whatever it is that I'm giving, am I coming from a place of fear? Fear of being judged, fear of being rejected, fear of failure, or is it coming from love? It's just, this is who I am, and I'm sharing whatever I have with you. And in some cases, it could be just words. In some cases, it could be money and other things. And yeah, I'm curious to see what you think, because that's something that I've been toying around with. I haven't actually expressed it out loud, but I feel like the analogy really works well with life and everything we do.
Well, we could ask 100 people. How many of the best things you've ever experienced came from fear? How many times did you go back and say, "Wow, I'm so happy I acted out of fear in that case"? Yeah, fear is interesting, because if we're looking at self confidence comes from faith in oneself. It means I'm confident in myself because I've built faith in myself. Now, to be very clear, there's blind faith and there's blind doubt. You can blindly have faith in yourself, just like you can be You can blindly doubt yourself. Both are equally as toxic. So when I mean faith, I mean that we've at least developed enough evidence that we are going to say we're going to do what we say we're going to do, or we are who we say we are, etc. But that's how self-confidence is built, and it's based off of faith. Sometimes people think the opposite of faith is doubt, but doubt and faith can actually work quite hand in hand together, in that if we're doubting things and we're getting to the bottom of them, then inevitably we're going to get to clarity, and clarity can provide further faith. And so the opposite of faith isn't doubt, rather it's fear. The opposite of faith is the fear that, but what if? But. And fear is one of the biggest inhibitors of success, because it's that what if principle. There's far too much on the line to act from fear in this life. If we actually look at how rare human life is, to take a human birth, if we look at how many species in the world, there's a few of us, only 8 billion. It's not a lot of humans compared to all the other living entities out there. And humans are special because we have prefrontal cortexes, which allows us to actually have coherent thoughts and sentences that stream together. And we can actually ask questions, and we can actually have a recursive language that helps us understand something in depth and go deep into it. Humans are very special and unique in that way. And it's very difficult to take a human birth. Even if we're looking at the being conception, functionally is what I'm referring to, is this idea of like the chances of being conceived are actually like phenomenal. How many conceptions and not conceptions happen from intercourse? It's like it's magical. What to speak of like how many humans go from conception to actually being born, to actually living a life. Like, from any way we look at it, human life is very special. It's very unique. And to the extent that we actually accept that reality, we see that whether YOLO, whether you only live once, or whether you don't only live once, which I tend to see a lot more evidence for, that we certainly live more than once. It's not that we come from nothing and then go back into nothing, because that's just a grammatical issue. Something can't come from nothing. But rather that whether you live once or whether you don't, it's irrelevant, that this life is special. And if this life is, if we can appreciate how special this life is, then we're going to want to act from a place of faith, a place of doing something miraculous, because tomorrow's never guaranteed. So if I act from a space of fear, I'm really being ungrateful to the unique, special situation I have as being a human being.
Wow, powerful. And I couldn't agree more with everything you said there. And looking at this now through the lens of, let's say, someone that's been on a spiritual journey for a couple of years or so, right? Just embarking on that. When before I was more agnostic and more looking at the science and just what science can show us. I have come as well to realize a few things that seem to be more true than not. Like the idea that things likely, when I say things, everything that happens around us likely has a purpose and a reason behind it, meaning everything that happens to us, which really we can see that's happening for us or happening of our creation, which that alone is a thought that I've had quite a few deep conversation on. Like, is everything that happens in our life of our creation, even the really bad stuff? And that's where discussions can get very deep. So I'm curious to see how you and your teachings and what are they in the Vedic culture and beyond, how do you see what happens in our day-to-day life? Does it have a purpose and a reason behind it? Does it happen for us, to us, of us? How do you see it?
Yeah, so this is, in philosophy, we call this a problem of evil. It's like if we have a purpose, that indicates that there's something eternal. Because if life ends with this, whatever small purpose we have in this life, it's just insignificant. It goes into nothingness.
Yes.
So there's some indication of perpetuality, or at least let's say some indication that it's worth spending time to try to clean this place up around us, for at least for future generations, if not for our future existence as well. Which is then indicative of, you have to ask the question, where does this world come from? Where do I come from? What is my purpose? What am I meant to do, etc. And if we ask these questions, what happens is we're really talking about philosophy, which means, who am I? I'm a unit of consciousness. I think, therefore I am. I can't doubt I'm conscious, because the fact that I can doubt if I'm conscious is indicative that I'm conscious. You may not know if someone else is conscious, but through projection, you can understand if I'm conscious and others seemingly functioning like me, and they've done their assessment that they're also conscious, I'll have to take their word for it. That's what seems to make sense. And
Yep.
so if I'm conscious and I know that there's something outside of myself, aka this world, this nature, trying to understand the nature of myself and the nature of this world around me, that's really what philosophy is. That anyone who's philosophizing, we're trying to ask those two questions and understand those two things, the world around us and our unit of consciousness. But then if we go deep enough into philosophy, we understand there's a third principle of where does this come from? Because something can't come from nothing. It's just, again,
Yes.
it's just a grammatical inconsistency. And so rather, where do things come from? If we look at the sun for long enough, don't look directly at it, but if you conceive of the sun, you realize, wow, there's power so much greater than me. And if you think, if someone's going around thinking there's no powers higher than me, just, all right, go spend some time in the sun. Tell me how long you spend until you realize, okay, there are powers higher than me. Go in the ocean, swim around a little bit. Tell me there's no powers higher. So if we could see with our empirical vision that there's a hierarchy of powers just in our own experience of life, we can understand that hierarchy means it goes up, it goes down. So that means there's some highest of all high powers. Call that what you please, from divinity to OG to the love supreme. I don't care what terminology you might give it. We're all talking about the same thing. The source of me, units of consciousness, and the source of nature is the third principle. So anyway, this is a long preface to just give some groundwork behind, okay, there's some divine source where everything comes from. And then there's me, and I can't doubt me because I'm asking the question about it. And then there's that which is outside of myself, that the material world around me. So if we look at these three things, we then are going to be faced with the question of, okay, if I'm doing good, why is bad happening to me? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do good things happen to bad people? We're then faced with the dilemma of trying to find some reasoning behind it. And the Vedic perspective presents it in the form of karma. So karma literally comes from the Sanskrit word kri, which means action. And with every action comes a reaction. So every action I take in my life creates a future certainty. Something I'm doing now is going to create a result in the future, some effect. The only way we can properly reconcile why good things happen to bad people, or, I do my best, but still bad things happen, whatever angle of vision you want to take it, is that we must understand that everything does have a purpose and does have a reason. And if we believe in cause and effect, and we can see it in this life, that there's repercussions, you make a decision, there's going to be positive or negative repercussions. And then if we think about it hard enough and we realize, okay, I know I'm a soul, because you think about it hard enough, we'll realize I'm beyond this body, and call it whatever vernacular we want to use, we're talking about the same thing, a self, a spirit, unit of consciousness. Then we have to ask ourselves, what is the nature of that soul? And we're faced with either accepting that we come from nothing and go into nothing, or that we're eternal. Those are the two options. And if we really consider it, you won't know one way or another with certainty. So why would you then not aim for the one that can actually provide some purpose reasoning, aka an eternal soul philosophy? That after when this body's over, just like when I take my clothes off at the end of the day and put my jammies on, I'm still me. And the next morning I take my jammies off and put on my clothes, but I'm still me. Even though the dress changes externally, the real me stays the same. So in the same way, the body might change, but the real me stays the same. And then what we're faced with is that if I've lived many, many lives over and over and over, there's certainly things I have to learn. And would an all-powerful, would the highest of all high powers, who, if it's the highest of all powers, must be the most powerful entity that's there, would the most powerful of all living entities create a world in which random acts of violence happen? No, because the highest of all high power, one of those powers must be compassion, must be all loving and compassionate, all loving and all powerful. You can't be all powerful without having love, because love is the most powerful thing in this universe. And so would an all loving, all powerful source of existence create a world where evil can actually exist? Ultimately, no, because now we're not talking about a compassionate source. We're no longer talking about the highest of all high powers. We're now talking about someone else, someone
Yes.
who's, you know, you make the wrong decision, you go get smited or whatever the case might be. No, we're talking about the actual supreme, the actual divine source, and that is who's all compassionate. So all that is to say, to answer your question, every action we have has a reaction. And therefore, whatever I'm being faced with in my life, I can understand that from my choices, either in this life or from past lives, are facing me with the opportunity to learn something I have yet to have learned properly before. And if it wasn't sensitive, it wouldn't bother me. If it wasn't an attachment, it wouldn't bother me and cause me so much angst and anguish. And oh, this is so much suffering, because one person's suffering is another person's happiness. You look at two different people with two different values, and for one person, you put them in the middle of the forest and they're like as miserable. Where's my phone? Oh my God, I'm going to die. You put another person in the middle of the forest and they're like, this is all I've ever wanted in my life. So suffering is relative. It is created in the mind, and suffering is actually there for us to learn. How do we grow? How do we learn how to transcend this material conditioning in such ways that we're not caught in the suffering? So, long story short, everything that's happening is from our past decisions, be it this life or the last, in a way as to provide us more understanding, knowledge, and clarity so that we don't make the same mistakes, so that we can ultimately transcend beyond suffering. That's the shorthand version, believe it or not.
Love it, Madhu. And it's pretty much what I've come to realize as well, is that there are challenges that we face in life. And at the end of a challenge, there's either abundance or, as you may call it, suffering. And it's dependent on our choices and how we progress with it. If we can overcome a challenge because we've learned in the past, then we see abundance. And abundance, again, doesn't have to be material. It can be abundance of happiness or whatever else you may want. And if you don't overcome a challenge, then there's going to be some suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And then the challenge will present itself again. Maybe it will look different, but it will present itself again. And then you have another opportunity. And there was a discussion I was having with a friend of mine recently where they overcame some difficult aspects of their life. And then they were asking, like, why do I still get presented with challenges for the things I just overcame? And the first thing that came up to me is like, well, yeah, I mean, that's how we get to abundance. That's how we get to that realization that we are powerful, we are creators, we are the soul, as you mentioned earlier. And it's just, I don't want to call it a test, but it's a way for us to realize, wow, look how far I've come. I've learned. Now I'm seeing the abundance in it. Because sometimes challenges show up that we've overcome before and now we fail, which means that we forgot. So it's about remembering. It's about remembering how amazing we are at the soul level, how all powerful we are. And that's how I see life. It's like we come into this life forgetting who we are, and it's a life of remembering and growing.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't say any better myself. I fully agree with that idea, and especially that, forgetfulness itself is actually quite a blessing, especially understanding that,
Mm.
I mean, in our life, we can see that the mind will suppress thoughts and experiences and quote unquote forget them to keep us safe. Because there's certain thoughts that are just so traumatic that if we remembered everything in life, it would be crippling, actually. What to
Mm.
speak of, and that's just one life. What to speak of remembering last life? So you come into this world and uh, through various traumas of including childbirth, whatever the case might be, it causes a type of forgetfulness. And as we grow, our job is to, as you indicated so well, that our job is to remember what our actual purpose is in this life. And that really ultimately comes down to contribution and service, because you're either a taker or giver and there's no in between.
Yes.
And um, the idea of forgiveness being a blessing is if we remembered every little thing that could and has gone wrong, who could function optimally from that type of situation? And so divinity provides this opportunity for a fresh slate. You come into this world and says, okay, no problem. You might not have learned every lesson that time, but I'll never give up on you. You just keep trying, and whenever you need me, I'm right here. That's the opportunity that is always available for each and every one of us. And as you mentioned, our job is just to try to remember that.
Yeah. Powerful. Beautifully said. Absolutely. I know in interest of time, as we are getting close to the end, you and I were talking offline before we jumped in that you just finished a 6 week pilgrimage to India, and it was really powerful. I would love to learn a bit more about what you did and the people that went with you and kind of what they've been able to uncover.
Yeah, well, a couple times a year we do different types of retreats and pilgrimages, etc. But every year, the most important one for me is we take people to India, which uh, as I lived uh, 5 years about as a monk, most of that time was spent in India in ashrams and monasteries. So I take people for a 2 week tour around India, and we go to the coolest places in the world, in my opinion. And it's really in the mood of a pilgrimage. Again, we also do retreats, which is nice. It's like, ooh, this is fun. Let me just enjoy. But this is where we're still staying in 5-star hotels and eating first class, holistic Ayurvedic meals that are delicious. And so there's a sense of luxury, but it's a pilgrimage, which means we go deep into spiritual practices there, and we're looking for a transformation, not just a break. The breaks happens automatically, but we really are interested in some type of transformation. And so this year we took 42 people with us on pilgrimage, and every year it seems to get better. And this year specifically, the primary realizations that came through for everyone, which was my indication that it worked, is that service is really what makes us happy.
Yes.
The sense of giving is what allows, I mean, even from a neurological perspective, a sense of happiness. And even if we want to talk about chemicals, all of the quote unquote happiness chemicals and the peace chemicals, they're released from a sense of contribution and service. Because, I mean, this is why people will say the happiest thing in their life is, say, taking care of their children, taking care of their partner, their family, whatever it might be. That doesn't make any material sense. How you're telling me that a new mother is the happiest? They've done tests that who are the happiest people, and some of the happiest people are women soon after they get birth. Some weeks after, with about 2 months after, 2 to 8 months after they give birth, there's this window where they're just like literally their serotonin, dopamine levels are just couldn't get any higher, and there's a sense of like total happiness and contentment. It makes no logical sense why, or at least makes no material sense why the mom could be so happy because the baby does nothing for mama. Now, mom's hearing that go, how dare you, Madhu? No, you guys know what I mean. The baby isn't able to reciprocate. You do everything for the baby. You feed, you change the diaper, and wipe the butt. And how is it that could provide happiness? It's because service is where real happiness is situated. Feeling like I've done something to positively contribute towards someone else's life, especially someone else I love. That's where real happiness comes from. Because again, relationships are the most important thing in this world. We'd even give up portions of our health for happy relationships. Again, you can live healthy forever, but no good relationships. Like, who's taking that deal? So the idea is creating an opportunity to be able to be of service in this world is really where happiness comes. And most people that came, they got the bug, the service bug. And so that was the biggest reflection and realization from that trip. And, it's also just fun getting to see people like go to the most beautiful places in the world and do practices that with, hundreds of thousands of other people in the same place. It's like meditate in a town where, again, tens of thousands, if not more, are meditating at the same time. It's just like
It's
inconceivable
another level.
practically.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, that's beautiful. I can imagine. I would love to join you one day on that. I'm sure I will.
Now
And
I'm counting on it.
now you're counting on it. Okay, perfect. Me too. And the service space is so powerful because one of the things that my spiritual awakening triggered within me is this search for purpose. But funny enough, I remember I was probably 5 years old the first time I asked the question, what's my purpose in this life? Because to me, it never made sense that we just grow up, go to school, have a family, have some kids, and then die. And I always asked the question, but I never really spent time to find the answers for it. Or maybe I wasn't in the right environment at the time. And really, the more I dug into that, I did thousands of hours of research, both in science and otherwise, and it's all about service. And what I've come to realize, and I'm curious to see your take on this, to truly be in service of others, I find that you have to be in service of yourself first. Because I see so many people in my life, and I was one of them as well, that you want to be in service of others, but then you don't take care of yourself. The self-care piece goes out. And yes, you can be of service of others. You can still be an okay parent, sibling, kid, But can you truly give if you're omitting the one person that you should take care of first so you can give more to others? What's your take on that?
Well, a drowning lifeguard can't save any, but a strong lifeguard can save many. And there's this idea that it would be preposterous if somebody came up to us and said, okay, I'm a driver, I'm the Uber driver, and you know, my whole job is I don't charge people. I just go around and take people wherever they need to go. But, it takes too much time to get gas or to change my oil or to change my tires and update the car. I just like to drive. I just want to be of service. People would laugh. It's like preposterous. Like, no one's going anywhere if you don't take care of the car. It's just, there's no question of service. If you can't take anyone anywhere if
Yeah.
the car's broken. So similarly to your essential point that you made, in order to actually serve, that means you have to have a functional instrument of service. It's like, in order to be a great musician, you really need a great instrument. And in order to be a great servant, somebody who's of service, you need a great instrument of that service, and that instrument is the body and the mind. And if we don't take care of the body and the mind, I mean, it's just, you die. It's not like there's no lack of clarity. You either grow or you die. Like, the body doesn't maintain. It's either in constant space of healing and regeneration or degeneration and dying. And so taking care of the body it's not like, yeah, it's important. It's absolutely essential to your point. And if you don't, then you actually can't really be of service to others. Because like I said, with the analogy, a drowning lifeguard can't save anyone. If you yourself are so engulfed in the challenges that you're experiencing and not in a space to overcome them, then how would you be able to help someone else process and move through that? And so it's imperative. This is why, for instance, in my job, we help a lot. We help mostly entrepreneurs, and a lot of them get upset with me in the beginning because before we talk about any business, I'm like, "What's your routine? What's your diet like? What's your sleeping like? How often are you meditating? How often you exercise?" They're like, "I'm not here for." Actually, it doesn't happen so often, but to be dramatic, people sometimes be like, "Madhu, could we get into like, how do I get more clients and more leads, and like, how do I improve my sales?" I'm like, "Yeah, we're gonna get there, but like, how you feeling? How's your stress levels today? How's your relationship doing?" And actually getting into the more important questions that are going to allow us to know if we're nourished in a space where we can give. Because if we are, then it's just a no-brainer. And you find people who have these kinds of conversations, it's because they got to a place where it's like, okay, the body cooperated enough, they could actually step out of survival mode and ask real questions of like, who am I here? What am I supposed to do? Why am I on this planet? What am I here to contribute, etc.? And then it becomes very apparent that service is key, and how we can serve, and including making ourselves the best instruments of service possible.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. Love that, Madhu. Okay. As we're wrapping this up, what comes up for you that you would like to share with us that we haven't touched upon yet? And I'm sure there's many topics, but
Well,
I know
one
there's
thing,
one coming up.
yeah, I mean, one thing that's always present in my mind, based off the instruction of my teachers, because I always move from a place of trying to, if we talk about serving, it's like, first and foremost, I want to serve those who've just dedicated so much time, energy, and resources to give me the knowledge and support that I have today. And all of my teachers unanimously say, please give this to others and be unabashed. Like, if you eat something really tasty, first thing you want to do is tell everyone about it. Like, oh my God, you got to try this. You have to try this. It's so good. And so in the same way, I want to share with everyone that there's always an option. There's always a step. There's always one person. There's always one choice. We're always ever just one decision away from changing our life. And if you're ever in a position where you feel helpless or hopeless, whatever the case might be, let this be an opportunity to snap you out of it, per se, and let you know that everything in life is reciprocal. And we see this. That's just why, if you take a game like Punch Buggy, if you've ever played this game, it's like when you see a buggy on the road, you get to like punch your sibling. It's like, punch buggy. Or maybe a less silly example is if you get a new car and you're driving on the road, you start to see all the other cars that are the same as yours. It's like, oh, I had no idea there's this many cars on the road. Because where attention goes, energy flows. What we're focusing our time and attention on, that becomes our reality, our focus. And so in our lives, whenever we're feeling down and out or lacking purpose, lacking clarity, lacking support, know with certainty that there's options to get you that clarity, get you that support, get you that help. The only step we need to take is making a decision, not teasing the idea and saying maybe. We make the decision that we're ready to advance, we're ready to take the next steps, we're ready to get the support, we're ready to get the help, we're ready to get those answers, we're ready to get that clarity. And simply by making that resolution and that commitment and that decision, I'm ready and I'm willing to do what it takes, you will be blown out of the waters to see how supported you become by, we can say the universe to be very general, but let's just say benevolent forces that are greater and more capable than what we are. And so never feel hopeless. And if you do, overcome those feelings with the attempt at, well, let's just say making the decision to move progressively in the right direction. And even if it's just one small step, that's all you need to do is one small step in the right direction. And before you know it, you'll be there. And who cares how long it takes? Just one step in the right direction and watch the magic happen. And if you don't believe me, no problem. Try it and challenge it. See if it doesn't work, no problem. Worse, if it doesn't work, you're one step closer to your goal. If it does, you're one step closer to your goal, and you see just how divinely supported we truly are.
Yeah, it's about trust. Love it, Madhu. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to chat with you, and we could do this for hours. So thank you so much.
I hope too, and thank you for all of your service to create a podcast. Most people don't understand just how much time, energy, resources, effort it takes to keep something like this going. So I'm so appreciative for you being so consistent and providing these opportunities for us to actually learn more and understand. If you guys like this, come on, support. What a great podcast! I mean, you're humble, so you won't say it, but I'm audacious. And if you guys appreciate something like this, you're support it. Give the 5 stars, share it with your friends, because sharing really is caring. And if we really want to serve, it's spreading these messages far and wide, so that not only we feel better in life and get relief, but that you can too. And know that I'm always here and happy to help in any way that we can to, serve and support. We've got communities. We give everything away for free, from our health courses to our business courses. We just want to give and serve just as you are. So for everyone listening, know that we're both here to do whatever we can. I hope you don't mind me speaking for you, but
no, absolutely. Go ahead. No, I love that.
Exactly. We're both here to do everything that we can to serve and support you.
I will have all the links for your stuff in the show notes as well, Madhu, so people can get to know more of you. Thank you so much again for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration of personal transformation. Your presence and engagement are at the heart of what we do, and I sincerely appreciate you, your time, and thirst for knowledge, inspiration, and empowerment. Please consider showing your support by hitting like, subscribe, leaving a comment, or writing a review. Your engagement not only fuels our mission, but also helps others discover these insights. For more daily guidance on personal transformation across the mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical realms, be sure to visit our website at unleashthyself.com. You can also find us on Instagram at Unleash Thyself Today, TikTok and YouTube at Unleash Thyself, and there we post daily content designed to inspire and empower you on your journey. If you have any specific thoughts, questions, or feedback, I truly value your input. I would love to hear from you. Together, we're building a community united in authenticity and purpose. Once again, thank you for being a part of this movement. Until next time, continue to embrace your true self and live a life on purpose, with purpose. See you in the next episode.